The sport of hockey in terms of revenue is thriving more than it ever has, with ESPN reporting that its playoff viewership is up 60% from last year. This has always been part of Gary Bettman's plan, to increase ownership profitability by growing the game's popularity in the United States. Clearly it's been successful in doing so, but the Canadian teams have sort of been neglected in the process, with the last time a cup was won by a team in the Great White North being the 1993 Montreal Canadiens when they defeated Wayne Gretzky's LA Kings in the infamous Gretzky Ice Stick year over 30 years ago. Canadian teams became even more handicapped when the salary cap was introduced as part of the CBA agreement that caused the 2005 lockout. In theory, the cap was implemented to create an even playing field for all teams and promote parity in the league where the top teams were too often dominating for decades at a time. The system was successful in doing so and has led to a point where any team that now makes the playoffs has a chance of at least winning a round, which was shown by the 2021 Habs and the 2023 Panthers, who qualified to compete for Lord Stanley by the skin of their teeth as 8 seeds, but still managed to have their respective Cinderella runs to the finals, even though ultimately neither brought home the hardware. So why, in a time when any team can realistically win the cup, have Canadian teams struggled so much? The answer is simple, it's the salary cap. Because taxes on Canadian teams are so much higher than those for the teams in the US, particularly the ones with no state tax like Dallas, the Florida teams, and Nashville, it has made it increasingly difficult for Canadian teams to attract free agents. Here's what I mean. If you were to take out taxed money from each team's total salaries, the tax-adjusted salary cap for the Montreal Canadiens is now $41 million, while in Tampa Bay, where you can benefit from low taxes, the new cap hit is $55 million. Now, obviously, this doesn't take into account the buying power of the American dollar, which every NHL player is paid in no matter the market. But the simple calculation shows one thing. The NHL's current salary cap structure is not fair towards Canadian teams. Would an elite NHL player want to play in ass-cold Winnipeg just to make millions less than the same guy in Tampa that has the same cap hit? Imagine what a team like the Maple Leafs or the Oilers could do with an extra $14 million at their disposal. Edmonton would become a top team in the NHL overnight, and Toronto would finally be able to give Matthew Knies that 10x8 extension. The truth is, there is no easy fix. Unless the cap is removed or a soft cap like the NBA's is introduced where teams can spend over their limit but have to pay a luxury tax. But I highly doubt this would ever come into effect anytime soon because of how wide the discrepancy is in teams' incomes between the highest valued teams like Toronto, New York, and Montreal, who would thrive under such a system, and the least valued teams like the Coyotes, who could barely afford to pay their hotel bills this year and ultimately led to their relocation. So here's a solution that has been proposed by many. Adjusting each team's cap so that the money that they can spend is equal in terms of take-home money for the players. This would make it so that Canadian teams, without naming any names, wouldn't have to pay $9.5 million to keep a borderline first-pairing defenseman and would be able to flesh out their rosters, which are often super top-heavy because of this. Unfortunately, this simple solution will probably never be implemented because for something like this to be introduced, all 32 owners would have to unanimously agree on it. The 25 American owners would instantly be against it. Barring the Rangers, Bruins, and Flyers, the US-based markets rely heavily on icing competitive teams to sell tickets and satisfy their fair-weather fans. So having 7 Canadian teams become way more competitive overnight would have the potential to severely hurt the bottom line for many of these owners. Not to mention that the owners of the teams in less lucrative Canadian markets like Winnipeg and Ottawa may also have an issue with these changes because they would not be able to take advantage of the extra allowance like teams like Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton would, for example. In the end, the interest of hockey fans and improving the on-ice product around the league was once again sacrificed to grease the pockets of billionaires. This will not change until Canadian ownership groups, whose teams provide a significant chunk of the NHL's revenue, decide to put their foot down and make the changes happen. Until then, we will have to settle for overhyped, fringe contenders with conference finals ceilings.